Howdy all, and welcome to the Homo Kitness Hour. Turn the volume down. Good morning, Jerry, my fellow Homo Kitness. I have been reading a book, and it is completely changing my entire universe. It is the awesomest book ever. I miss George too. Although, George has been chasing Dub all morning, so I'm not missing him too terrible much yet. So I've been reading a book by Rutger Bregman called Humankind. You can already see what's happening. I'm already taking notes. But he was talking about Homo puppy is what he called it. We are Homo puppy. And he said, an interesting thing is that all of the other tribes of humans prior to us were stronger, faster, and smarter than us. And so why did we survive? And it's because we domesticated ourselves. Just like we domesticated dogs and cats and pigs and cows and sheep. We domesticated ourselves first. We've become smaller and cuter and fuzzier, and that made us want to take care of each other, and so we did. And then we started meowing at each other, meow, just like cats do, or barking just like dogs do. And this isn't just a theory. He's got literally studies and entire thousands of people deep things in here that he's talking about, and it's mind-blowing. I don't even know how to, I'm not even ready to comprehend all of the things I'm learning. Good morning, Brent. For example, he says in here, here's an interesting thing. He says, over the decades, proof that Colonel Marshall, who had done this theory that, he said in 1943, Lieutenant Colonel Lionel Wigram complained that he could rely on only a quarter of his troops. He said, or take General Bernard Montgomery, who in a letter wrote home said the trouble with our British boys is that they're not killers by nature. When historians later began interviewing veterans of the Second World War, they found that more than half had never killed a soul. Most casualties were the work of a small minority of soldiers. In the U.S. Air Force, less than 1% of fighter pilots were responsible for 40% of the planes brought down. Most pilots, one historian noted, never shot down anyone or even tried to. So they looked into things. In 1863, at the Battle of Gettysburg, at the height of the Civil War, inspection of 27,574 muskets found that 90% of them were still loaded. This made no sense at all, of course, because the average rifleman spent 95% of their time loading the rifle. They even found what was even weirder was that of those, where does it say it? I just lost it. Some 12,000 were double loaded or triple loaded. One had 23 balls in it. What that means is that the soldiers knew that the majority of that they wouldn't get yelled at from their officers if they were loading their muskets. And therefore, they loaded them again. That way they didn't have to shoot. 95% of the muskets recovered were loaded and never fired. Loading a gun is a perfect excuse not to shoot. Nobody's going to yell at you if you're loading your gun. It's fascinating. In 1860s, French Colonel Ardon de Pique discovered that his soldiers were not into fighting. They'd fire their weapons, but they'd shoot high on both sides. So they'd spend all day shooting over each other, because that way they could waste their time doing anything except trying to kill people. And the obvious conclusion is that most soldiers were not trying to kill the enemy, right? It's fascinating. Colonel Marshall in Colonel Marshall in World War II was a historian and a colonel, and he was present during an attack where the U.S. Army probably the Marines took an island, and they took this island that the Japanese held, and they crawled along for 3 hours in the heat and finally just set up camp. They were tired, they were exhausted, they didn't want to mess with it. And so he stayed with them, and then didn't know that less than a kilometer away was a Japanese encampment. Naturally, at night, the Japanese attacked the encampment, and the Americans held them off. But it turned out that only 13% of the soldiers, because he was a historian, so after the battle was over, he couldn't figure out how they won. Because the Japanese didn't hit them very hard, and they didn't hit the Japanese very hard. And so he interviewed all of the Americans, regardless of their rank, regardless of what was going on, and got actual histories of each and every one of them. In every case, he found out that only 13 to 18% of the soldiers actually fired. The rest of them did not fire their weapons. Because he did this, anonymously, so you wouldn't get in trouble. And in fact, that a couple of the officers had gone up and down the line yelling at them to fire. But it was okay because the Japanese weren't firing either. Neither one of them wanted to kill each other. Rank and file. That's fascinating. These are all fascinating statistics. It's what it's saying is the Hobbesian image of humans, judging that they are killers and savages, is empirically wrong. Like, not just theoretically wrong, but the facts don't back it up. In fact, he was saying that rank and fire. Right, the average soldier didn't want to kill anybody. And he was saying the interesting thing is, if you look at the bones, forensic scientists look at the bones of all of our predecessors, the Homo neanderthalis, the Homo australopithecus, all of the other variations of humans. And in all of those bones, about 15% to 20% of those bones, and this goes for primates too, goes for apes and chimpanzees, have met a violent end. They were murdered or they were killed or something like that. If you look at human bones, like Homo sapiens are 2% until the 20th century, where if you include every war that we've been in, we're down to 1% of us meet a violent end. 99% of us die of old age now. 99% of humans, Homo sapiens, die of old age. That's wild. That's wild. That's a wild, like mind-blowing. And he's got the studies in here that back this up. He's not just saying it. He's actually quoting philanthropists, archaeologists, people who've been out in the field, the scientists who've been compiling this data. And what he says early on in this book is that we suffer from two biases: a negativity bias, which is we're more attuned to the bad than the good, because back in our hunting and gathering days, we were better off being frightened of a rattlesnake than thinking it's cute. because legitimately that didn't go over so well, right? And an availability bias. If we can easily recall examples of a given thing, we assume that thing is relatively common. The fact that we're bombarded daily with horrific stories about aircraft disasters, child snatchers, and beheadings, they lodge in our memory, completely skews our view of the world. As the Lebanese statistician Nassim Nicholas Taleb dryly notes, quote, "We are not rational enough to be exposed to the press," end quote. So, right, I mean, and that's even including like car accidents. 99% of us will survive to old age. Like 1% of us. 1% of us. But there's 8 billion of us, so 1% of us is still 80 million people, right? I mean, that's still a lot of people. But if you think about this, World War II killed, what, 20 million people? And that includes all of the Jews in the Holocaust. That's still less than 1%. At the time, it wasn't. But, you know, even at the time, it was about 2%. You know? 2% of the world's population was killed in World War II. And that was dramatic. And that was enough to make everybody stop and go, holy. You know what I mean? We all had to stop and go, oh my God, what are we doing? And it's still considered one of the worst times in the history of the planet for us. And only 2% of us died. You know? Even in disease, which we can't count disease, of course, in these numbers, because, of course, disease is disease. So, like, when you talk about smallpox and things like that. But, I mean, this is completely... First of all, it's vindicating me. I have always said that I believe that humans, by default, are good people. We kind of have to be convinced to do evil. We have to be kind of coerced into evil, either by maltreatment or by happenstance. And this is totally backing that up. But if you guys read my Facebook post this morning, where I started talking about Homo kitnus, all of us being Homo kitnus, we survived during the Ice Age because we all built shelters for the entire group. We didn't just build a shelter for ourselves. We built a shelter for everybody. Where all the other variations of humans built a shelter for themselves and that was it. And then they all died out because they didn't have the genetic diversity. But we're cute and adorable and fluffy and we take care of each other. And so we did. So literally it's encoded in our genes to take care of each other. In our genes. We lived through the Ice Age because of that. I'm all amazed. This is like mind-blowing to me. And it's snowing. I'm just going to say it's snowing. Although it's sort of spitting. It's not really snowing. Meh. 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 Anyway. Good morning, everybody. Here's my 15-minute sermon on humans being good people. Thank you for tolerating that. Let's see what kind of trouble we can get into today. All right. Brent, I sent off Airship 27 last night. Do you know what's so funny? So, Booma, he quotes that book. Two things happen. First of all, Lord of the Flies, never based on anything. It didn't actually happen. Lord of the Flies was a story written by a guy who, first of all, he was a boomer. So he was born of the World War II era. And good morning, Sue-Ann. So he even quotes it in here. He says, in this book, he mentions Lord of the Flies. And he says, let me go back because it's right up here in the front. He talks about, it's back here. Because he actually specifically brings up Lord of the Flies. I think it's after this, that's why. I'm not finding it. Yep, right here. The real Lord of the Flies. So, he literally has an entire chapter on it. He says, first of all, the story never happened. An English schoolmaster made it up in 1951. Wouldn't it be a good idea, William Golding asked his wife one day, to write a story about some boys in an island showing how they would really behave? Golding's book, Lord of the Flies, would ultimately sell tens of millions of copies, be translated into more than 30 languages, and be hailed as one of the classics of the 20th century. In hindsight, the secret to the book's success is clear. Golding held a masterful ability to portray the darkest depths of mankind. Even if we start with a clean slate, he wrote in his first letter to his publisher, our nature compels us to make a muck of it. Right? In Lord of the Flies, Golding imitated effectively what happened in World War II. He says, it's a made-up story, but people think that it's real. And what happened was, later on, the actual story occurred. Did you know that there actually was a story of Lord of the Flies? In 1966, a group of boys in Tonga, on the island of Tonga, got fed up with their parochial school because it was school and it was boring and they were annoyed. And they were teenagers, so 13 through 16. And these 6 boys stole a fishing trawler and put out to sea. None of them knew how to sail. None of them knew what they were doing. So they all went to sleep that night and woke up the next morning in a storm. The storm immediately tore the sails off of the boat and then ripped off the rudder. So the boat had no rudder, it had no sails, and it came to rest on an island called Ada, ADA. It's a little teeny island, which is effectively a little atoll. That's it. It's a rock. It has nothing there. For 15 months, those boys lived on that island until a fisherman from New Zealand came across to try to fish he was looking for lobster. And he came across the island, and here on this island, where he comes up on this island, he's like, well, this could be a pretty good lobster fishing area. And he sees a naked boy standing on the cliff there, yelling at him, jumps in the water with his long hair, jumps in the water, swims up to the boat and says, hi, my name is Joe Smith, or whatever his name is. He says, we've been stranded here for, we think, many months. Turns out they'd been there for 15 months. There were 6 boys. They had all built a little civilization. They even had a little weight room where they were pumping weights. They were well fed. They were muscular. They were strong, and they had taken care of each other, including the boy that had fallen off the cliff and broken his leg. They went down, hauled him back up the cliff, and then made him king for 3 weeks while his leg healed. So he was king, and they decided that the way that they had set up their rules were, if anybody had an argument with anybody, one of them would get sent to one side of the island, the other would get sent to the other side of the island for about 4 hours, or however long it took. Then they'd bring them back together again and say, okay, apologize to each other. And they'd apologize to each other, and that was the end of it. So they had built their own little society, took care of themselves, grew on an island that they didn't even know how to fish. These were parochial school kids in an English parochial school, so they were speaking fluent English. In fact, when that was the thing he wasn't sure of, because he was like, I'm coming up on this island, and here's this boy swimming out to me, and he said, I knew the Tongans sometimes put their criminals on islands and abandoned them. So he was worried that he was going to get killed, and this kid comes up in imperfect English British English, no less, says, "Hi, I'm, whatever my name is, and we've been stranded here. Thanks for rescuing us." So the real Lord of the Flies actually happened in 1966. And those boys took care of each other, and they got strong, and they took care of themselves. They had a little farm, they had little houses, they had little buildings that they lived in. They had, all of this from kids that had nothing more than a pocket knife and 4 or 5 strings from like what was left of the wreck of the boat, right? Whatever they could steal off of the wreck of the boat. They had made a guitar so that they were singing songs to each other every night. It's, in fact, the real Lord of the Flies really didn't happen like the book did. In fact, quite the opposite. They were in great shape. They're still alive today. All of those boys now, they are all running this guy's fishing business out of New Zealand. Because they were like, well, we're bored. And he was like, well, if you're bored, come work for me. And they were like, okay. So it was just like, so really the Lord of the Flies actually happened. And what's so funny is, this is what this guy said. First of all, he did the entire chapter on trying to track this story down. Because when people that, like the fisherman, first was trying to tell the story, and nobody listened. So, the Tongans knew, because he returned the boys to the Tongans, and the first thing that happened was the Tongans put the boys in prison. That was funny, because they stole the boat, right? Second thing that they did was he then decided to make a movie out of their adventure, because that way they could get him sprung from prison. You're waiting for something. Thank you. All of this is so fascinating to me. I'm mind boggled. But the truth of the matter is, because of negativity bias and availability bias, we all believe that people by default are horrible people. But in reality, he's bringing up point by point by point where we behave completely different. During World War II, Churchill, Stalin, Hitler, and Roosevelt all read a specific book from a guy named So the book was called Psychologie des Foules, or The Psychology of the Masses. It was written by a Frenchman named Gustave Le Bon. All of them read it. Hitler, Mussolini, Stalin, Churchill, and Roosevelt all read this book cover to cover. The belief of this book says man descends several rungs of the ladder of civilization when panic and violence erupt. And the idea is that that's when all of this stuff reveals our true nature. So, on 19 October 1939, Hitler briefed his generals on the German plan of attack. The ruthless employment of the Luftwaffe against the heart of the British will to resist, he said, can and will follow at any given moment. So the idea was that if you swamp the world, that's right, if you swamp London with bombs, the people will revert to barbarism. And then the soldiers, the British soldiers, will be forced into London to control the people. We all know that didn't happen. So a book club assignment. This book is called Humankind. It's by Rutger Bregman. It has completely changed my view on things. I was on Reddit the other night, and we were talking about something about humans devolving into animals, and somebody said, we don't. Have you ever read this book? And I went, good morning, Bob. So anyway, on September 7th, 1940, 348 German bomber planes crossed the Channel. So the fine weather had drawn many Londoners outdoors. So when the sirens sounded at 4:43, all eyes went to the sky. That summer day would go down in history as Black Sunday, or Black Saturday, and what followed as the Blitz. Over the next 9 months, the Germans dropped 80,000 bombs on London. Entire neighborhoods were wiped out. 1 million buildings in the capital were damaged or destroyed, and more than 40,000 people in the UK lost their lives. So how did the British react? What happened when the country was bombed for months on end? Did people get hysterical? Did they behave like brutes? In October 1940, Dr. John McCurdy drove through southeast London to visit a poor neighborhood that had been particularly hard hit. All that remained was a patchwork of craters and crumbling buildings. If there was one place to be sure to be in the grip of pandemonium, this was it. What did the doctor find? Small boys continued to play all over the pavements. Shoppers went on haggling. Policemen directed traffic in majestic boredom, and the bicyclists defied death and the traffic laws. No one, as far as I could see, even looked to the sky. In fact, if there's one thing that all accounts of the Blitz have in common, it's their description of the strange serenity that settled over London in those months. An American journalist interviewing a British couple in their kitchen noted how they sipped tea even as the windows rattled in their frames. Were they afraid? Oh no, there was the answer. If we were, what good would it do us? So that was fine, but they chalked it up to British stiff upper lip, right? Right. But so what happened when put to the test, the theory set forth by the celebrated crowd psychologist Le Bon could hardly have been further off the mark. So what happened at this point was, this is even funnier. Curiously, given the evidence, the country's military experts still espoused the idea that a national's morale could be broken. In fact, when it came time for the British to retaliate on Germany, Churchill's closest friend, Frederick Lindemann, also known as Lord Cherwell, maintained that bombing works. To prove his point, he dispatched a team of psychiatrists to Birmingham and Hull, 2 cities that were bombed. They interviewed hundreds of men, women, and children who had lost their homes during the Blitz, inquiring about the smallest details, quote, down to the numbers of pints drunk and aspirins bought in the chemists. The team reported back to Lindemann a few months later the conclusion: there is no evidence of breakdown of morale. So what did Frederick Lindemann do? He ignored it. Lindemann had already decided that strategic bombing was the best, so he went to and sent a memo to Churchill that said, investigation seems to show that having one's house demolished is most dangerous to morale. People seem to mind it more than having their friends or even relatives killed. At Hull, signs of strain were evident through only 1/10 of though even 1/10 of their homes were destroyed. He lied. So what happened? The ensuing retaliation was, we dropped so many bombs on Germany that in one night, Dresden, more people were killed in Dresden than all of the city of London. More than the population of London. So what happened at that point? How did the Germans respond? Like they really did, right? So in fact, and this is something that's appalling looking back in hindsight, they specifically bombed German towns and cities. All the while, the Air Force, the Allied Air Force, was striking strategic targets such as factories and bridges. Churchill directed his forces to take out entire neighborhoods. So, what happened? Between May and July 1945, Dr. Frederick Ponce interviewed almost 100 Germans whose homes had been destroyed. Afterward, he said, "I was really full of vim and lit up a cigar. The general mood following a raid," he said, "was rather euphoric, like after a war that has been won. There were no signs of mass hysteria. On the contrary, in places that had just been hit, inhabitants felt relief. Neighbors were wonderfully helpful. Considering the severity and duration of the mental strain, the general attitude was remarkably steady and restrained." He kept close tabs on this. He said even a grocer jokingly hung up a sign in the front of his shop saying, "Disaster butter sold here." They weren't broken. Nobody was broken. It was completely useless. It's still, that's actually what he had said too. He had specifically said that as well. He says in this book that we continue to use this Hobbesian belief that humans will devolve, that we will fall into the lowest rung. But he quotes Hurricane Katrina, that during Hurricane Katrina, everybody took refuge in the Superdome. 20,000 people were in the Superdome. And he said, and there was no power and there was no air conditioning. So it was hot, humid, and dark. And the people pulled together. And all of the reports that the news had of infants getting their throats slit and people getting raped didn't actually happen. Those were just stories. Nobody died. Nobody was killed. People died, but they died of heat exhaustion. They died of natural causes. They didn't die because other people killed each other. In fact, in there was a great sign of humanity. He also noted that during all of Hurricane Katrina, hundreds of boats, airboats, came from Florida and Texas to rescue people off of houses. And these Texans and Floridians were riding around in New Orleans rescuing people. In fact, the only people that were murdered during the entire time that Katrina happened, the aftermath of Katrina, came from the National Guard shooting looters, whom they thought were looters, and it turned out they weren't. That's the only murders that happened. So the same thing happened during the World Trade Center bombing. During the World Trade Center bombing, people were orderly coming down the stairs, serenely, quietly, step after step, always on the right side, never going on the left side. They left room for the firemen to go up the left side of the stairwell. They knew their lives were in danger. They knew they were in trouble. They knew the building was coming down. But they didn't panic. They even let the wounded go first, passing the wounded down so that they would exit the building first. This is not the behavior of selfish people. Oh, yeah. Yeah, we still believe it to this day. We constantly believe this. We constantly believe it's from Hobbes, John Hobbes, who came up with this theory in the 1700s. But even before that, it's been posed from Greek philosophers. It's posed from Roman philosophers. They all believe that at our heart, we are animals. And we're not. In our core, we're good people because we are genetically predisposed. Genetically predisposed to help each other by genetics. And he's been making this case in this book, and I'm like, huh. Like every page is like this. My brain is just like, as you can tell, because I haven't gotten a thing of work done this morning at all. But I'm fascinated by this. This is intriguing to me. I'm like, wow. It's so wild. So, anyway, yeah. I'm going to switch over to you. because I can read this better. Bark, bark. But if you're barking, you're domesticated. That's the thing. That's what's so interesting about all of this. Domesticated animals make noises. Wild animals don't. I mean, wild animals roar, but it's to terrify. They don't communicate. And the fact that George will jump up here and meow at me, he's not scaring me off. In fact, quite the contrary. He wants me to pay attention to him. He's learned communication means cooperation. And cooperation means scritches for him because he's George. But genetically, we have trained our cats to cooperate with us. They catch the mice and they get a warm home. They get the mice out of our grain elevators and they get a warm home. It's been very work related for both of us. It's beneficial for both of us. Same with dogs. If dogs will bark to warn people off, they get a warm home. We make them part of our domestication project. And they survive. In other words, Darwinism is survival of the fittest. Cooperativism is how you beat Darwinism. And communication is how you get to cooperativism. Right? We domesticated ourselves first. We are meowing at each other. Literally what we're doing. The Ice Age would have wiped all of us out. The hominids would not have made it through the Ice Age. And in fact, the hominids didn't. It's just the ones that cooperated that did. And we brought animals with us. We brought, like the aurochs, don't exist anymore. The proto-cows, they don't exist anymore. There are still boars, but the proto-pigs aren't here anymore. The domesticated pigs are. The domesticated cows are. Right? I mean, like, we brought animals with us through the Ice Age. Not only did we save ourselves through the Ice Age, but we brought other animals with us. It was wild to think about that. It's just bizarre to think about that. I mean, like, the story of Noah and the Ark is almost true in its own way. It's just a sort of simplified version of it. But that's literally what we did. We built shelters to hold more than just meat. We built shelters that held entire families, entire parts of the species, and then we brought other species with us. Think about that. Like, how wild that is. And to some degree, how creepy it is that Noah's Ark holds through. I mean, how much of Noah's Ark is stories handed down from generation to generation about what really happened? And the thing is that the archaeology is starting to back this theory up, you know? Well, there are arguments out there. So Hobbes was the one who says that we are destined to become animals. The opposite side of that is a French theologist in the 1800s who, let's see if I can find him here, because he talks about the French theologist who is on the other side of this Hobbesian belief, right? So, and I'm going to try to find it here because I'd rather say the actual name. Oh yeah, so the real quickly, the talking about Homo economicus. the belief that we are by nature selfish. He says the thing is that he says that great thinkers like Thucydides, Bentham, Nietzsche, Freud, Luther, Calvin and Hobbes, Machiavelli, Augustine, all of these have started with the assumption that we are by default not good people. And what he had said was, at some point in time, they had put up one of the in the 90s, George Gerbner called it the mean world syndrome, whose cynical symptoms are cynicism, misanthropy, and pessimism. And they believe that if you were to say world A, wait, what is it? Where is it? He talks about this too. He talks about planet A and planet B. Because he talks about, I see him talking about it here. So much stuff in here. In just the first freaking 12 pages of this thing, he talks about nocebos, which is the opposite of a placebo, you know? So he says, two American psychologists presented test subjects with several situations featuring other people doing apparently nice things. What did they find? Basically, we're trained to see selfishness. Right? He says, generally speaking, would you say that most people can be trusted, or do you need to be very careful when dealing with people? The results are pretty disheartening. In nearly every country, most people think other people can't be trusted. Even in established democracies like France, Germany, Great Britain, and the United States, the majority of the population shares this poor view of fellow human beings. The question is, why? When the science constantly tells us we live on planet A, do we persist in believing that we live in planet B? Oh yeah, no. That's entirely what Watterson was referring to when he did Calvin and Hobbes. That is absolutely what he was after. He's open about it. He says it in the first book right there. I've got the book right there, and he says it right in the opening. So absolutely, that's what he's after. So that's what he's talking about, is this mean world syndrome, where you have, oh, you know what? Just so you feel better, Brent, just so you feel better, here. Why did it reset completely? It's completely reset everything. I had a restart last night, overnight, where it did the restart of the doodly wops. Here you go. Completed. Illustration 6 is off. It's even signed down here, and it went to Ron last night. So we now have 3 remaining illustrations left on Airship 27. Here's our sketchboard so far. We have these 3, and then we have to have a meeting before we do the cover. So Ron doesn't want me to even think about the cover until we've had a meeting, because he wants to pick one of these. Well, that's what he's saying. He says it pretty straight up here in the first chapter. He says, the modern media frenzy is nothing less than an assault on the mundane, because, let's be honest, the lives of most people are pretty predictable. Nice, but boring. And while we'd prefer having nice neighbors with boring lives, and thankfully most of us have, boring won't make you sit up and take notice. Nice doesn't sell ads. And so Silicon Valley keeps dishing up even more sensational clickbait, knowing full well, as a Swiss novelist once quipped, that, quote, news is to the mind what sugar is to the body, end quote. The people behind Facebook, Twitter, and Google know you well. They know what shocks and horrifies you. They know what makes you click. They know how to grab your attention and hold it so they can serve you the most lucrative helping of personalized ads. You know how I've been saying all along, There's no function going on. There's no people behind Twitter, Facebook, and Google. They're not turning everything liberal. They're not turning it. It's not the liberals that are in control. And I have proven this myself because I only engage in EV articles. And now all I get is conservative EV articles. I don't get liberal EV articles. There's no positive EV out there. If I were to believe what I read on Facebook, I would believe that 90% or 99% of the people out there hate electric vehicles because they are a liberal thingy made up for fake news, and that they don't work, and that they're bad, and that they're horrible for the environment in reality. If I were to believe what my feed tells me, did you use it to drive us to the point where we begged them to take control? Please run the world. No, but I mean, that's the thing I keep saying over and over. People are abandoning Facebook and abandoning everything because it's super liberal. People say that the media is liberal. It's not. The media is not liberal. The media is horror all the time. Whatever is the scariest. What will scare you the most? And if you're conservative, then what scares you the most is liberal news. If you're liberals, what scares you the most is conservative news. I've been sitting there going, how can people say that the news is liberal? All I hear about is Trump this and Trump that. You know, how can you say it? You know, and it's because the news that terrifies me, because I'm on the liberal side, would be conservative news. I can do that. So it's just that because of this bias, the availability bias, everybody believes that the news is controlled by the other side. That's fair. I used to watch CNN all the time, and I just can't anymore. I just can't. And not necessarily because it's super liberal. It's just so full of horror all the time. And it started to become clear that it was designed to provoke me. It was designed to make me scared. It was designed to make me mad. And I've got better things to do with my life than be scared and be mad. I'm like the Londoners sipping tea. But what good will it do? Right? I mean, like, what good does it do to be mad? The hominids that they dig up and primates that they dig up show that 15% have died a horrible death. We're down to 1%. We're not killing each other. We're really not. In fact, if you look at just the figures, more people today can read than 50 years ago. Of the population of the world, more people can read today than 50 years ago. Today, there's literally a third as many violent deaths as there were just 30 years ago. It's safer to walk the streets today, everywhere in the world, than it was 30 years ago when we did walk the streets. So, I mean, just looking at the CDC's reports of deaths, that's their job. They're supposed to report how people died. And you can see people shot, people stabbed, people raped to death. All of these things doesn't happen as much today as it did 30 years ago. We're doing better by all accounts. Today, there are 197 democracies on this planet out of 200 and something countries. 50 years ago, that was 102 out of 300 countries. So back just after World War II, only 1/3 of the countries here had free people. Today, almost 2/3 are all free. And yeah, you can argue whether we're an oligarchy or a democracy or whatever. And yes, we definitely need to work on our country and do some fixing here. But it's all house cleaning. In the end, there aren't jackbooted people walking through the streets looking for us. In the end, we don't have the SS. In the end, we don't have Mussolini. In the end, we're doing far, far better. Well, I'm not going to get into an argument about CDC and especially on COVID. Mostly because COVID, you have to read another book that's important on that one. If you want to know what really influences people, and I don't have it up here, if you really want to know what influences all of the stuff that happened post-COVID, you need to read Richard Preston's The Hot Zone. That's markedly more what happened. So, because that reaction comes from Ebola, which is brutal and nasty and horrible. The diseases that keep walking around this planet, that keep trying to take us out, are progressing. Because there's, nature abhors a vacuum. So, somewhere along the line, nature's going to try to figure out how to kill us off. So there's a certain amount of, perhaps there's also negativity bias there, right? I mean, you deal with Ebola, and Ebola is a slate wiper. Ebola is a disease that literally liquefies your innards and makes you just bleed out of every hole you have. And that's pretty much what it does. At its core, Ebola isn't that bad of a disease. It just breaks up the bonds between cells. And that's it. But that literally liquefies you. So, bad. Right now, it only travels in the blood until it doesn't. And there has already been one strain of Ebola that went airborne. But for some reason, it only affected monkeys and didn't affect us. However, clearly Ebola is working it out. So, when we start seeing a higher incidence of death, our people are quick to get on the bandwagon of stopping it. And COVID has a higher incidence of death. So perhaps it's a negativity bias. Maybe they did overreact. Who knows? But the long and the short of it is, there's a reason for it. Because if Ebola ever gets airborne, if it ever figures it out, and it's trying, it's 90% of us. So the death rate of Ebola Zaire, which is the first strain, was 90%. If you got Ebola, you had a 10% chance of survival. Ebola Sudan was 80%. Ebola Reston, which is the one that went airborne and came out of Reston, Virginia, was airborne, and it was a 91%. But it only attacked monkeys. So, and only rhesus monkeys, didn't even jump from monkey to monkey. So it didn't even go to the other primates. It just took out one monkey strain. So it was like, what? So The question is, when do you cry wolf? And when do you not? When is it real? We didn't cry wolf. Nobody knows about Ebola arrested. Nobody knows about it. We literally had an airborne Ebola in 1994 in Virginia of the United States. An airborne version of Ebola with a 90% fatality rate. And we never heard about it. Nobody heard about it. We heard about Ebola coming out of Africa. Right? Like, all of these things, it's intriguing. Now, you're asking yourself, I know that people who are new to my stream are asking themselves, why in the world are we doing this, Guy? What's the point? And the reality is, I'm writing a comic which is a statement about social operation. In its core, Bellatrix Rising is firmly about humans and humankind. And this whole homo kitteness, homo puppies concept has changed my view. Because now I believe firmly that there are stages of development that we all go through as a sentient culture. And the last stage of it is communication. Once we hit communication, that's the piece that makes us. Communication. Critical. And once you take humans off Earth, which we have in Bellatrix Rising, and you move them to a position where they are, there we go, move this back here. Move them to a position where the humans no longer have to have Hobbes belief systems anymore. The humans spend an inordinate amount of time simply surviving what's left of humanity. When they spend time doing nothing but living and just existing and making it through one of the greatest disasters in humankind, literally destroying the earth, it's going to let them, these humans, they're going to come up with a different theory on things. Because it's hard to deny that we are generally good at heart if we're all stuck in the same dome. And if the dome so much as sneezes wrong, all of humanity is destroyed. So, it's hard to deny that we all are working together and everything like that. I also think that yes. So, when you look at this, we're actually going to be able to play this because Alex, the character Alex in my story, comes from Earth. She comes from actual Earth. She was born on Earth, here in Denver, somewhere, about this time. So she comes from this era of Hobbesian belief that humans are inherently evil. And now I'm looking at this and going, I need to change a little bit. Yep, she's from Old Town. That's where she lived. I don't know whether she was born in Old Town, but she's from here. But like this Hobbesian belief that we are horrible people at our core and stuff like that pervasively permeates our culture and does not permeate the unity, right? The unity found that humans help each other in the greatest of trials because they weren't allowed to cover it up anymore. They had 4 other alien races around them going, hey, you guys are pretty good at this. Look at you guys working together. Look at you guys doing a good job. Look at you guys taking care of each other. So those other 4 races wouldn't let them forget and drop back into this Hobbesian belief. It depends on how far in the future we're talking, Bob. So, because she's not from 500 years from now. She's from today. That's part of the story. We'll get there. It's there. Right. But anyway, the whole thing is that, like, we weren't allowed to slip back into Hobbesian belief. Yeah, it's part of the reason why Momentary Ghosts is the first story in Bellatrix Rising. The introduction of Alex into this system is the big arc, the one that takes all 50 of these issues, 50 of these episodes, not 50 issues, 50 episodes, which is 150 issues or so. So there's a long arc on that one, which involves more mecha. Because mecha are important. Sort of. But on purpose. So. Anyway, that's why she's talking to the cat in that whole scene. That's part of what she's doing with the cat. Is talking to the cat, and the cat's doing the right? Mecha. You need mecha. Because mecha are cool. But that's the thing I'm like looking at, and I'm thinking this through, and all of this stuff is making some very big sense to me. In fact, so much so, I don't know why in the world. We've done our Silver Pentacle work. I'm waiting to see what the word is from the boss on that. So it's on hold until I get word back from the boss. So I'm going to switch back to Bellatrix Rising today. Anyway, right? Why? Okay. Not sure what to think about that, but okay. All right. We've got 2 thumbs up from the art team at Airship 27. And Ron's actually saying, like, it, holy smokes, this is good, which makes me feel good. So, brain personality transplants. You want to embellish on that thought? I'm curious what you mean by that. Good morning, Andrew. Andrew's another one. We were talking last night because my buddy Booma has a nickname. Booma. Andrew had a nickname too, but he's sort of outgrowing his nickname, so I've changed back to Andrew. Which is cool. I got no problem with that. I was just kind of like, huh. I'm fascinated, though, by where my brain, like, accepts changes to names and things like that, and other names, I just can't get over it. Because I have issues. Okay. Because I've been calling you Sarge, and you're like, it's okay to call me Andrew. And I was like, okay. I didn't know whether that meant it's okay to call you Andrew or you prefer to be called Andrew. I knew you as Sarge, so I still know you as Sarge. So I was still working with that one. I'll go with either one. Oh, transferring your ghost to a probe. I get that. So if you want to be called Sarge, I am more than happy to call you Sarge, because that's the name that comes to brain whenever I see you, because that's where I met you when we were working on all of the various projects that were out there at the time. Good. Then I will continue to call you Sarge if it's okay with you, because that's what I knew and that's how I know. If that's fine by you, I will happily return to that, because there's nothing worse than calling you by the name your wife calls you when you get in trouble. That's not a good sign, man. That's not a good sign. No items matching research. Fine. Momentary ghosts. No, back one. Where am I going? What am I doing here? Who are you people? Switch to drawing monitor. Yes, you. Yes, you. Yes, we were just talking about you. And the fact that you're domesticated, whether you like it or not. Yes. So life support, yes, Bob, but what if you look at it from the point of view of gas motors versus EVs? Okay. So, for example, a gas motor, here, Jerry, just for you. Hi, I'm a cat. A gas motor essentially takes and burns a fuel to create joules of energy, right? An electric motor takes electricity, to create joules of energy. Really, the EV is slightly more efficient as far as energy consumption goes, because right, Heisenberg uncertainty principle inbound. But an EV uses and utilizes much more of its energy better more efficiently than a gas motor does. But effectively, they both do the job just fine, right? A gas motor is not as efficient in using and utilizing its energy, but it doesn't mean necessarily that EVs have an advantage over gas cars in that instance, unless you're after true efficiency, right? But for the most part, they still transport you from point A to point B. If you have replicators, and we do, that's the conceit that Bellatrix Rising has in its story. We have replicators. So rocks to replicators, you know what I mean? Like, we can take and create air, and we can create food, and we can create water. So your basic necessities are dealt with by a machine that's this big or whatever, right? You just generate stuff. So, and I'll bet you we probably call it something like the alchemy machine or something like that, because it probably does effectively alchemy, right? It just reconfigures stuff, and you put all your poop in it, and it makes it into food, and we just don't talk about it, right? And all the carbon dioxide sucked in the back, and it's turned into oxygen. And it just converts the carbon atoms into oxygen atoms inside there by alchemy, by scientific alchemy, right? It's just converting atoms around and moving stuff around and moving electrons around and stuff like that. 3D printing humans. That'd be kind of wild. But if you think about that, the difference between a human and an AI, then in that instance, is minuscule. The AI still requires power. You're still going to need to figure out how to power the AI so that the processor continues to run, right? And we require power, and fuel will require fuel as well. It's just that the AI can use a nuclear fuel. So that's a thought process that I had, is that kind of concept. It's issue 3. Which I think is the one I want to deal with. Right? And this is issue 2. And this is issue 3. Right? So here we're talking about a lot of the things that we want to talk about in this. And I have been trying to figure out the key to this scene. And I think I know it. I think I know what my key is and why is this on the wrong monitor. Again, I spend a lot of quality time on the wrong monitor, guys. There's my pin stuff. Wow. We've reset completely. Did you reset my shortcut keys too? Yes, you did. Oh my God, everything got reset. Whatever happened last night on this update from Windows borked all kinds of stuff. Huh. All right. Well, pin settings. Oh, did you set my pin settings weird? Dang it. I'm going to be all mad if you set my pin settings weird. I just got everything the way I wanted it. Oh, what's precision mode? She's going to have a discussion about free will at some point in time, because her will is not free. If you're talking about Alex as a character, her will is not free. I kind of like the idea of right now it's just could be space. I think that'd at least be better than what we have. Okay. Right? Now do I have control? I do. Good. And now I have space, which is cool. Look at that. All right, let's get back here on the felt pen. Okay. Oh yeah, our sorry, Bob. So I had part of my tablet controls were on top of what you were saying over there. So I saw discussion over will be entertaining, and I didn't see the rest of it, the proposed and the coffee. I actually would love to sit down and have a wonderful philosophical discussion with you over coffee. I happen to like coffee. I happen to like philosophical discussions. So all of these things are a very big positive in my world. However, I thought you were talking about the will of Alex. She's going to have a discussion about that as well at some point. There will definitely be a thing on that one as well. So, however, I want to bring up something very important here, which she needs to be discussing, which is people are inherently bad. Hobbesian. Alex. That's not what I'm getting from this crew. Yep, railing against her fate with the cat. So I hate tropes, as a side note, unless you subvert them. Then I'm on board. So I'm subverting the trope. Just haven't gotten there yet. So we'll get there. Maybe. It's all good. It drives the story. It's very important. It's just that it's out there. Awesome. All right. Issue 2 is going to need some love too at some point. We're going to actually have to go back in and fuss with issue 2. So I can already tell we've got some problems with issue 2. That's right. We'll get there. Not that worried. And the truth is, it's kind of hard to avoid all the tropes. Somewhere along the line, you run into a number of tropes anyway. There's not much you can do about it. But, I mean, it's the old, all the stories have been told. Yeah, but again, if you look at this from the overview, back to what Bregman's saying over here, in an overview, we actually don't mistreat each other. I mean, that's the thing. What he was saying, though, is he was saying that science is starting to show that oxytocin, the hug pheromone, makes us love each other, also makes us tribal. And we have to, and part of what civilization does is struggle against that tribal concept. And so part of what's happening is we have a tribal function that comes in with oxytocin by nature. It's all good. And you know what? You don't have to agree with me. You don't have to agree with me. That's okay. I mean, you know. But he was saying that oxytocin is what makes us tribal. And that can be exploited. And when it is exploited, that's when we get things like the Nazis and things like that. And it's because fear is functional for us. We default to fear over defaulting to non-fear. Because as he said, it's better for our survival if you stay away from all snakes instead of thinking that all snakes are cute. Because if you think that all snakes are cute, bad things will go down and you won't live to the next generation. So in a basic form, in the Darwin form, we're designed for fear. And the problem is that oxytocin also makes us it makes us love our own, whatever our own is. We can adapt that to whatever it requires. The problem is that you can exploit it. Yeah, I fundamentally stay with the Star Trek belief system that, you know, we are not warp capable yet. Maybe. The thing is that I think we are doing a great job of starting to operate in a complacent environment and make complacency part of who we are and how we operate. When you have a society where less than 1% or 1% actually gets killed by things in the environment, then 99% are free to not be killed. They're not subjected to Darwinism. And so we can now start building a universe around complacency, around peace. So when you were saying before that you feel like we're on the verge of a change in thought process, a change in philosophies, I think you're right. I think what we're going to have to find is that there needs to be a change in what complacency means and what peace means. I mean, I'm seeing it with the economics. You know what I mean? Economically speaking, it's going to be very soon, we're going to have to deal with the fact that 30% of us won't have jobs, won't be able to get jobs. There won't be jobs for us. It won't be a matter of laziness. It'll be a matter of the fact that PCs take over, robots are taking over all of the jobs. So we'll have to figure out what to do with 30% of the people that don't have jobs. Can't just say that they all starve to death and die. That's against our human nature. We ultimately won't allow that. It doesn't matter whether people are doing it in Congress or not. At some point, our nature as humans will be to say, no, we can't let them die. Right? So, but we have obviously some kind of scientific trend. I mean, even the whole discussions we're having about AI art here has been discussing what are we going to do? All of us that have jobs in doing art, we're going to end up being forced out of the system again. You know, we just figured out how to put ourselves into the system, and they're going to force us out again. But you can't work at McDonald's because McDonald's now is trying to get down to 4 people running the entire show. You know what I mean? So, I mean, they're working on robots to cook the hamburgers, which would do a better job of it and a faster job of it anyway. You know? And so they're looking at that. You go inside now to these huge screens and push buttons to order your order. And that's more effective and more efficient too. And if you had a robot who, when you pushed no pickles, would not actually drop a pickle onto your hamburger that it was making, then you would always have the ability to have a perfectly done hamburger every time. So, oh yeah. Dad and I had this argument a lot because Dad was like, "Why is it you don't believe in aliens if you are such a Trekkie?" And my answer was, "I do believe in aliens. I just don't believe they visited us yet." And he's like, "How could you say that?" And I said, "Simple. I actually am cognizant and aware of how big the galaxy is." And I said, "Once you understand how big it is, it starts to make a lot more sense. We are effectively in the Amazon jungle of the universe. I mean, you know, there could be civilizations all around us, but because it takes so long for us to send a message by foot to the nearest civilization, we don't know that people exist, and they don't know that we exist, you know. Space is big, really big, mind-bogglingly big." Yes. A lot of our thinking is obsolete and needs to change. You're right. Yeah. The thing is that resources, now, one person can create enough resources to take care of 10 easily. So we need to figure out what to do with those 9 people if all of the resources are handled. How do you deal with those 9 people? Traditionally, what occurs is one person learns to farm that can feed 10 people. So the 9 people start working on calculus. That's generally what has happened in our world. We invent newer and wilder things every time the general operation is covered. So the farmers allowed us to create civilization. It's the reason why agriculture is the big shift in our culture, in humans. Once it didn't require one person to hunt all day long to feed their family for one day, then you ended up with the ability to free them up to do other things, and art was invented, and storytelling was invented, and music was invented, and all of those things came along because of the fact that one person could do the work of 20. Right. Brent is following along with my theory. It's not that there aren't aliens. I believe firmly that there are other life forms in this galaxy. That I'm not even remotely surprised by that. And I'm even sure that they're intelligent. And now I believe that they probably even are cute, because cute survives. Homo kitnus. But I mean, I think that we move along that logic process. And the problem is that we are screaming in a hurricane right now. So you're going to have to get really close to Earth to find us. We're only 150 light years out at tops. So 150 light years is barely anything. To give you kind of an idea. Because, of course, that's a thing that, like I said to Dad, the thing that happened was I finally realized how far everything really was. Right? So, if we look at my beautiful star maps, right? And you look at this from the point of view of this square goes to this square right here. This is 500 parsecs to the Orion superstructure, right? And a parsec is 3.25 light years, which means that if you want to look at how far in the solar system or in the galactic structure, only this much of the galaxy knows that we even exist. Right? Put here, that is that. That much of the galaxy even knows we exist. That one pixel in this whole map. One pixel. It's the only pixel that knows that we exist. Nobody else knows that we exist. Because the signal of our light information is only here. At this point in time, the Hyades cluster, where my Commonwealth lives, has heard of us. But even Bellatrix hasn't heard of us yet. And the cluster around Bellatrix, the Pleiades, no information. Betelgeuse, no. The Beehive cluster, no. And we happen to also live in a dead zone. This is a not very populated zone. There's not a lot of stars in here. Right? So our first radio transmissions started out just a little over 100 years ago, and that's where they are. And Dad kept asking me, how can you not believe in aliens? I'm like, I totally believe in aliens. I just don't believe that they can hear us yet. We haven't even broadcasted past our neighborhood. It's kind of like, here I am in Arvada, Colorado. Why haven't a million people heard of me yet? Because I'm broadcasting and my signal hasn't gone out very far. Right? So that's why. I don't think that there's any question that once the aliens figure out where we are, we'll be welcomed in, because now I actually have more of a belief that in order to survive, we all have to learn to cooperate. And in order to build large craft, like spacecraft, we have to cooperate. So any intelligent species out there will have learned to cooperate. And if they can cooperate with each other, they'll cooperate with us. So now, contrary to Stephen Hawking's belief that aliens will be hostile, I actually believe that the odds are good that our first alien species will be nice. Because you have to be nice to cooperate, and you have to cooperate to build spaceships. So, yep. Our star is the third star to live here in this spot. 2 other stars have been born and died here. Born, lived out their entire lives, and died. Think about that. That's one of those listed under, So I'm full of mind-boggling statements today in my weird, strange sermon of the day. I don't know why I'm sermoning, but I am. Yeah, maybe. I think we'll find that there's potential life on, say, Europa. Hi. There's potential life on Europa. There's potential life on various other places. There may even be life on Jupiter. But it'll be life, like I agree with you, it'll be life in a primordial way. If you were to think about the history of life, oh yeah, I love that book. If you think about the history of life on this planet, just the history of life, I'm not talking about the history of the planet. Life's only really been here for the last, say, billion years or so, right? So for 3/4 of the life of this planet, nothing was here. It was a rock. But if you were to take that last that last billion years of life and make it into a calendar, then from January, when the first life appeared, January 1st, all the way to about mid-October, it was just bacteria. I mean, that's the part that boggles my mind every time. From January to about mid-October, maybe mid-late October, it was just bacteria and mold. And that's it. And then in late October, we get the not the Cretaceous. I just lost it. It starts with a C. Cambrian. The Cambrian era. Trilobites and squids and things like that. It's right at the end of October that the world invents sex, which is all that's important here to explode from where it was, right? Because before that, it was asexual reproduction. After that, we have sexual reproduction. Then the Cambrian, the Cambrian explosion happens, and all these creatures start showing up all over the place in October. In that scale, dinosaurs were here through December, right? So we go all the way up to December, and we're talking about Christmas, when finally an asteroid hits and wipes out all of the dinosaurs. It's right around Christmas time, right? So in the history of life on this planet, we've gone through all the way to October with just bacteria and single-celled animals. October through Christmas is all of the animals that have ever lived on this earth, all of the creatures. Then Christmas to New Year's is the rise of us, and we literally don't show up on this planet at all until like 11 p.m. on New Year's Eve. We don't even show up. So, yeah, right. A little afternoon on, well, so you're thinking of Cosmos Clock, which is the world, the entire world compressed in a different way. This is like life going through the whole thing here. He actually goes through it in this too. He talks about us as puppies, right? Dinosaurs go extinct on Christmas Day. Humans appear at 11 o'clock on Christmas Eve, 11 p.m. at night on Christmas Eve. At 11:58 p.m., agriculture shows up. 11:58. 2 minutes to midnight is when the first agriculture shows up. Right? So 2 minutes to midnight. In the grand scheme of the world, we're really young. We're really, really, really young. In a year. And at the last second, we got George. Those of you that are wondering, I think I did this theory. And I may be off. We'll see. And it's funny, I posted this, and I remember people going, well, thanks for being so depressing. Why is that depressing? What's depressing is how few of these comic strips we have. That's what's depressing. Yeah, he's really young. Although not as young as he used to be. Let's see what's down here. It's weirdly sized, so it'll be easy to see. Huh, I wonder why I can't find... No, that's not it. I went through here, didn't I? I just went through here. Literally just went through there. Sometimes it's like, well. Yeah, he's a plank time. Upload maybe. Seems like I had something going on. Where'd it go? I just saw it like 3 days ago. People. Here's the first book of Knight's Usury Paradox. I'll have to finish this off somewhere along the line. I know I did it. Feel like I'm missing something though. Maybe in scans? Nope. Oh, look at all these in flat layout. That's useful. When we get to redoing the book, here are all these in flat layout. That's useful. So like I reorganized all the square ones into flats. It's horrible. I don't know what this gap means. Another one? Yeah. Anyway. There we go. That's the one. It takes 230 million years for the Earth to go around the core of the Milky Way. If that's a galactic year, divide the year up into 12 months, 30 days, 24 hours. So, with that in mind, the universe was formed a little over a galactic year. The universe was a little over a galactic year old when the Milky Way formed. For the first 38 galactic years, this part of space was home to another star. Right? Sadly, early in the year 39, it turned red, grew massive in size, and died, blowing apart all of its gases. By mid-year 38, this area had become a birthing nebula. It was there in late December of galactic year 39 that our sun was born. Earth formed mid-July of galactic year 40, and life formed in early October of year 43. Around Valentine's Day in galactic year 49, the new life created so much oxygen the balance of Earth's atmosphere shifted and killed off a lot of that life. It's called the oxygen die-off. It took 5 long galactic years for proto-life to invent sex, which came along as on a balmy early May evening in the year of 55. Simple animals show up 2 years later, in September of 56, and then fish in April of 57. It took 15 galactic years to get from single cells to fish, and just 1 to get there all the way to the dinosaurs. Life was working its way out of the ocean by the close of galactic year 57, and the dinosaurs ruled from August of 58 to April of 59. Their reign lasting 8 short galactic months. On tax day of 58, an asteroid struck them down. We recovered, and just 4 months later, humanoids were using tools on the African savanna. Anatomically accurate humans show up on this the morning of show up in the scene just this morning. So anatomical humans showed up this morning about 20 minutes after midnight on July 25th of the galactic year 59. Less than half a galactic hour ago, humans invented farming. Writing was invented just 12 galactic minutes ago. The entire dynastic history of ancient Egypt lasted 8.5 galactic minutes, from the rise in 3050 BC until the fall of Roman rule in 641 AD. All of the history of China, from the Jia dynasty until the last breath of the Qing dynasty, is just 9 minutes. Japan, with one of the oldest continuous ruling families, assuming it was founded in 650 BC, is all of 6 galactic minutes old. It's now July 25th at 11:02 a.m. and 24 seconds in the 59th galactic year. 1 galactic second ticks by every 7.3 Earth years. All of civilization we know it, as we know it, the entirety of recorded history, everyone we have ever heard about or written about, has only existed in the last 14 galactic minutes. This is one human is given just a little over 10 galactic seconds to live their entire lives. I wrote this entire thing up because I had just done Bellatrix Rising's time setup based on galactic time instead of based on Earth time. Because if you meet a whole bunch of other aliens, you're not going to say to them, aliens, aliens, you're just going to have to deal with the fact that we do years by our year and stuff, and you have to figure it out, man. Figure it out. Why your planet? Because we're cool. We like this stuff. So I figured once you have a galactic civilization, it'll be based on a galactic turn. And the galactic turn would be this. But doing this, if you say a year on the galaxy is one orbit, then we are 59 orbits from the beginning of the universe. And just about 60 orbits. What's so funny is I posted this, and the only comments I got were, "That's so depressing. Thanks." And I'm like, why is that depressing? I'm like, Like, it's not depressing. It's cool. Anyway, this was the core to the beginning of the time situation in Bellatrix Rising. But what I love is my fish. Pork. Man. Or my son with little eyes, like, The dinosaur going, "That's not good." Egyptians. The pictures are fun. Like my cell here is like, Oh yeah. Early Earth going, well. So, anyway, I love doing this game, this thinking game. But now I have to invent a new thing. Which is, when was cooperation invented? Right? Because now this is part of the story of Bellatrix Rising. I got nothing done this time. This is an awesome episode of my show. I hope you guys appreciate it. At least, though, if anything, you guys might go out and get Humankind by Rutger Bregman. Here, let's do this. So, yep, I once again will happily say you guys need to read Humankind by Rutger Bregman. It's a good book. He also apparently has another book called Utopia for Realists, how we can build the real world with a 15-hour work week, open borders, universal basic income, which makes sense. That seems to fit his theory that, because I believe in UBI. I have always believed in UBI. I believe we're going to have to get to a point where UBI is just a thing and accept it. We have to let the people who farm, and the other people invent calculus. But that means you have to let a whole bunch of people live their lives and not do anything in order to have those calculus inventors. That's what needs to happen. And we need to be able to figure out a way to accept that. And I think that will be a thing that will be part of the story in Bellatrix Rising, is that there is a significant portion of the population that does nothing. They operate day to day. They just kind of move through life and exist. And they probably do something. They probably have hobbies. They build models or draw or paint or things like that. Right? And so you'll have these people, because I don't think people can stay idle. I think people cannot stay idle. In fact, I think that you'd end up with a lot of musicians and a lot of artists and a lot of model builders and a lot of people who comb through data because that is a fun thing to do. My sister spends an inordinate number of hours on our genealogy, doing the best that she can to perfect our data. Nobody's paying her. Nobody gives her a dime. She barely tells anybody she does it. Hours. Hundreds of hours. We started our genealogy project in 1999. Since then, I can't even imagine the number of hours that she has logged in our family history. I think there will be archivists, there will be storytellers, there will be a whole bunch of people who they're not employed. They're not put into the system. Nobody is observing or watching them. They just do the things, and they add to the pool of society. It's sort of what I'm doing right now. I mean, I'm literally living this out. Nobody's paying me. I wish they would, but nobody is. And so I am just giving stories, and I'm putting information out, and I'm processing data. In my instance, I apparently seem to have found myself to be a armchair philosopher. Who knew? I didn't realize that was where I was going with life, but here I am. So that's a thing. Okay, it's 11:01. I have a meeting with my boss for the thing for the school, driving school, at like 11:15. So I'm going to have to go now so that I can prep for that meeting, because I need to talk to her and ask her a whole bunch of questions, because I'm teaching on Saturday, and I'm like, what am I doing? So the teaching part I've got under control. It's the paperwork part that I never have any idea what to do with. I'm so bad at the paperwork part. So Thank you all for joining me and putting up with this for the last however long. I went through this ridiculously long thought process. I think I scared everybody off, but that's okay, except for you, Bob, who stayed here this entire time, and Brent, who sat there and said, "Have you been working?" So, and Jerry's here too. So Jerry stayed with us, and Bob stayed with it, and Brent's like, "Why are you not working?" Oh man, love you, Brent. I will always appreciate that. Always, always, always. Okay, guys, I'll see you tonight as usual, and keep your eyes on the stars. Bye bye.